And we continue at 2:05 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
John, here's California in a nutshell. I just saw a tweet from Emily Hoven of the San Francisco Chronicle. A new legislative analyst office analysis finds that the College Corps, Gavin Newsom's program to give up to $10,000 in financial aid to eligible students who complete 450 hours of community service, spends half of its funding on administrative costs rather than financial aid.
Of course. I bet you if you look real close, they found a way to get some of that money to the crooked homeless charities, too.
Oh, and look at this. That tweet got retweeted by Ashley Zavala, so maybe she'll have a piece on that tomorrow that we can play.
We can only hope. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. He is a Republican political strategist who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. John Thomas, welcome.
Good to be with you. Good to be with you, John.
Well, thanks so much for stopping by. So earlier this morning, former Orange County Congresswoman Katie Porter made it official that she would be a candidate for governor here in California. However, she added a caveat to it. Randy, let's play Alex Michelson from Good Day LA this morning.
But interestingly, she's also saying that if Kamala Harris enters the race for governor, she's going to drop out.
Okay, what the hell kind of announcement is this? Where she puts up a video where she talks about nothing but hating Trump and federal issues, and then tells Alex Michelson that if Kamala gets in, she's going to drop out anyway.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't trust Katie Porter as far as I can throw her, and John, I can't throw her very far. But she spent quite a bit on that video, probably $50,000 on producing that whole spot. It was in multiple locations. She's investing in this race, obviously, and she's trying to get out early enough so that she can get enough of a lead to likely discourage any heavyweights other than herself from joining this race. And you got to imagine, John, that she's trying to inoculate herself from really the main question she's going to get right now, which is what about Kamala? What about Kamala? But if Kamala looks weak or weaker in 6 months or 12 months from now, John, there is not a question in my mind that Porter will stay in this race and battle Kamala Harris. The only reason she'd drop out is if she thought she could not beat Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris has said that she's going to wait until the end of summer to decide if she is going to run for governor. Now, that seems like a long way before the election, but really it's not, because you have the primary in front of the general. And if you're a middle-class person or you're someone who's not a billionaire, it takes some organizational skills to put together the endorsements, to put together the money, to make sure you have an infrastructure so you can campaign up and down the state. By waiting until the end of summer, is she really screwing a lot of these candidates?
Yeah, she is, because if you're a Porter alone, Porter likely has the most name recognition because of her Senate run of any of the potential Democratic candidates outside of Harris to date. But even Porter, you've got to get going, if nothing else but to put together the war chest. But the longer that Harris delays or floats the idea that she might, she's in, she's not, it makes it difficult to get the financial support and the endorsements in the meantime. So, but if you're Harris and you are considering running for governor, there's not an incentive to run early, because the earlier you announce, the easier it is for opponents like Porter and others to take shots at you and bring you down. So if you're Harris, it's wait as long as you possibly can, as long as because she's going to win this race. Harris is going to win this race on name ID and running television ads. We learned objectively, John, when she was a presidential candidate and as a vice president, she is a horrible candidate, but she's a good statewide candidate. This is Kamala Harris in California because she lets the TV ads do the talking.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, when you look at the articles about Kamala Harris running for governor and you look at the quotes that people close to her are giving to the publication, it's always something to the degree of, well, she doesn't want to leave politics as a loser. She wants to do something where she is successful electorally and then bow out of politics. And becoming the governor of the largest state in the union, that's not a small job. That's not a small task. It will be regarded as her taking on a real job and being involved in a real campaign, and that's how she ends her political career, as opposed to being the woman who lost to Donald Trump in a presidential election. However, if that's your motivation, you really probably don't have a lot of ideas or have even spent a lot of time thinking about the insurance crisis or the homeless crisis or the budget or the spike in crime or water or fire or any of the other actual problems that are plaguing the state, where we need someone in that office who has at least thought about these things and has some answers for us. If she's running because she wants to add this job to her resume, then she's running for the wrong reasons. Based on your experience as a consultant, when candidates run for offices for the wrong reasons, does it usually end up blowing up in their face?
It typically does, John, and that's because running for a race of the magnitude of the governor of California is so large. Even for people who have an advantage in name ID, it still is a major undertaking, and you've got to give it your all. And if you're just doing it for some notch on the belt, it's not enough. Although I do think Kamala would be the prohibitive favorite, really because she has two powerful things in her corner. One is, she spent a few $1 billion just recently in advertising nationwide, so she has a donor base as well as lots of name ID that any of her opponents would probably have to spend a couple $100 million just to match at parity. And the other is she has something that's powerful in statewide politics in California, and that is identity. And Democrats love rewarding candidates for their identities. So she has those two things. But, John, I wouldn't be terribly shocked if Kamala delayed if she was only running just for a notch on the belt and to maybe keep her brother-in-law, have access as a lobbyist, etc. I wouldn't be shocked if somebody like Porter, could do a runaround with Harris. But it looks at this point that Porter is attempting to inoculate herself from running against, I guess Kamala would be the de facto party leader. Porter doesn't want to deal with those attacks at this point. It's an odd dance, John, and we're going to know as more candidates start squawking loudly whether or not they think Kamala is really in this race or not.
Let's go back to the Katie Porter video for a second, because in that video, she used profanity. This is something that is not uncommon for her. She has sworn in any number of videos that she's put up online, and she's not the only one. Eric Garcetti, the former mayor of Los Angeles, of course, swore all the time. Donald Trump is someone who's known to throw an F-bomb around or two. Gavin Newsom is someone who has been swearing more liberally lately. What do you think the motivation is for politicians to use that kind of language? Is there some evidence out there that shows that voters look at profanity and look at swearing and they think that means authentic? What's the reason?
Well, you may recall, really, California was trailblazing on the cussing 10 or so years ago. The chairman of the statewide Democratic Party in California started using the F word, particularly as it related to Trump. And that was their way at the time to try to identify with a younger voting electorate and audience and seem cool. It's kind of gone a little bit beyond the cool thing and now has become slightly more relatable. And it's an attempt for Porter and others to seem like they're just regular people and they're not stuffy politicians. So it's more of an issue of relatability. But the problem is, John, you see so many, particularly in it's one thing if Donald Trump, when he rarely cusses, it's in a casual off the cuff setting. It seems natural because it is. if you're doing a pre-scripted 3-minute long campaign introductory video, cussing is really beneath the dignity of the announcement. It seems so predetermined because it is. And I don't think it has the relatability that Porter was hoping that it would have.
It seems like, particularly for female politicians, where they're worried about being seen as being soft, especially for executive positions, if they swear and they use salty language, it makes them look like a tough broad. It makes them look like someone who's not going to get pushed around. And I believe it's intentional.
Yeah, that is right. I also think the Democrats are trying to feign outrage about this presidential administration and the state of affairs. And so for them to seem that they're just so fed up and they're not taking it anymore that they must cuss, that's a way to do it. But I don't know, the whole video was launch video was a little bizarre to me, John, because it did focus so heavily on national issues when she's running in a state that is filled with crises that really aren't national in scope.
If you're in a room with a politician and a bunch of big dollar donors and the politician comes in there and it's F this and it's F that and they swear a lot, how does that usually go over?
It doesn't go over well. I've been in a lot of rooms with politicians and donors, and you don't hear a lot of curse words because the donors are expecting you to be sincere and listen to them and not have a temper. They want you to obviously be relatable, but they don't want you to lose your cool. So in private, you really don't hear a lot of cussing, John. It's really this external, to your point, putting forth some bravado and toughness if you're a female candidate. And then in other uses, it's an attempt to become relatable to perhaps low information voters. But you really don't hear the cussing in private.
We're speaking with John Thomas, who you can follow on X at The Thomas Guide. John, let's shift gears here and talk a little Washington politics, because the stock market of late has just been taking blow after blow. The stock market is well below where it was on the day that Donald Trump was inaugurated as president of the United States. Certainly a lot of the trade wars going on right now between us and Canada, us and Mexico, us and China are part of that. What do you make of how the stock market is impacting Donald Trump's popularity, and do you think he's going to start to backtrack on any of these things, given what's going on Wall Street?
Donald Trump is such a unique politician and public figure. Most other public figures would fold to this kind of pressure in a heartbeat, or this is why they actually wouldn't go down such a robust tariff plan in the first place, because they'd be afraid of this. I think Trump's going to remain strong for a couple reasons. One, Trump is looking at a longer-term view of how he has to rebalance trade, particularly with the U.S. and China, and this is the temporary pain that we have to go through. So he takes the long view. And the other, John, is Donald Trump is more popular than Ronald Reagan with the Republican Party. So his faithful people are, in fact, still with him. So I think Trump hangs in tight. But you know what I find fascinating, John, is when the stock market was roaring under Trump last time, and Trump would occasionally point to the stock market as evidence that his policies were working, the media would ignore it completely and say it didn't matter. And now that Donald Trump's president and temporarily the stock market is getting a little jittery, the news cycle is simply about the jitteriness of the stock market in an attempt to hurt Donald Trump. I really think this thing is getting blown out of proportion. And it's tough because the stock market, thinks quarter to quarter. They don't think over a 3 or 5 or 10 year period. But, look, I think if we're going to save the United States, this is the kind of long range leadership that it's going to take.
How long can he let this go on for before it starts to hurt his numbers?
Well, I think it can go on for a quarter or two. But what Trump has to see or has to demonstrate is some measurable progress for the United States as it relates to his tariff agenda. So if you start seeing, and you already start seeing the margins, but if you start seeing in significant ways auto manufacturers re-onshoring, if you start seeing other countries folding in certain trade things that Donald Trump wants, I think the American people are going to be right back with the president. But look, John, if we go a year and there's no measurable movement, obviously that's going to be a real problem with the president. I don't think we're going to see that because I know at my firm, John, we advise a lot of international corporations, and they're all thinking about how can they bring manufacturing back to America to avoid these tariffs.
When you look right now at the National Democratic Party, there's no leader, and that's not uncommon for a party who's out of power. The Republicans had sort of a unique scenario where Donald Trump was the leader of the party, even though he wasn't the president, because he was the president for 4 years. He declared that he was going to run for president again very early, and no one was really a threat to him in that Republican primary. So the Republicans have gone many moons with Donald Trump as the leader of the party. Well, right now, no one regards Grampy Joe or Kamala Harris as the leader of the Democratic Party. And right now, they look to be rudderless, where you have Hakeem Jeffries as their leader in the House. You have Chuck Schumer as their leader in the Senate. But you look at cable news, you look at the chat shows, and those two aren't the faces of the party. It's the loudest voices in the room. It's people like Jasmine Crockett. Speaking of politicians who like to swear a lot, the congresswoman from the Dallas area who's been all over television being extremely critical of Donald Trump in very vulgar ways. AOC is back on the scene. She's all over the place. You have Bernie Sanders holding rallies in cities all over the country that include transgendered singers singing about Jesus with a Richard. What do you make of where that party is right now, and who is the leader of that party?
Well, they don't really have a leader yet. We'll see if one emerges. I think some of the loudest, like squawking voices, like Crockett and AOC, are hoping to, claim the throne. But yeah, I think part of the problem, John, is that the Democrats have yet to find a message other than being anti-Trump. They haven't found a economic message that's better than Trump's. Their positioning of complaining about DOGE is an 80-20 issue in favor of Trump and DOGE and 20 in favor of the Democrats. So they just haven't really found any messaging, number one, that works for them, never mind a leader. It's essentially like watching, the high school JV team versus the Trump admin that's like the pro NFL team. It's almost not even a competition. I guess if I had to say, John, you see some jockeying. Perhaps Gavin Newsom, maybe with his podcast and his kind of dangling out some moderation here or there, but there really is no leader. But I would say besides the leader, John, it starts with they have to find a message. What are they for? Not just anti-Trump, but what do they stand for? And they can't say what it is. And I think in part it's because they're still held hostage by the extreme woke left of their base.
You looked at their behavior during the presidential address before the joint session of Congress, where you had Al Green, who was kicked out for heckling. You had any number of them carrying signs that were protest signs in the hall. You had a lot of the women wearing pink in protest of Donald Trump. You had very angry, very profane interviews being given in the hallways by many members after the speech or even before the speech was over, because many of them left early. And then you juxtapose that with the podcast that you just referenced that's being hosted by Gavin Newsom, where he's meeting with Charlie Kirk, he's meeting with Michael Savage, other conservative leaders around the country. And he's trying to portray himself as being a blue dog Democrat, a moderate Democrat, someone who has the ability to speak to many of the states that voted for Donald Trump in the 2024 presidential election. You can tell that Gavin Newsom thinks that this upcoming election is going to be a lot like 1992, where the Democrats are so eager to come out of the wilderness, they're willing to go for a moderate. They're willing to go for someone who is a blue dog conservative Democrat. Yet you look at people like Jasmine Crockett and others in the Congress who clearly believe that the Democratic voters want a fighter. They want someone who's not going to take any crap from anyone. They want someone who's not going to be polite. They want someone who's going to be rude if that's what it takes to get their message and point of view across. And she's going to take every opportunity to do that. Based on your reading of the electorate as it stands right now, which one are Democratic voters more sympathetic to?
Well, you hit it literally on the head. Crockett and AOC think that their fighter purist lane is the way to go, and it may be rewarded slightly in a primary to some degree for a hot second. And Gavin thinks the key to general election electability is more moderation. I tend to think the moderation is where you want to be, simply because if a Republican is not elected, then Trump is a change agent. He is arguably more of a bombastic character, and if they're rejecting Trumpism and the next kind of heir of JD apparent, if that's him, you would imagine they'd have to go back to a more tepid, moderate candidate, and that's the calculus Gavin Newsom is making. I'm not. I would probably put my bet more on a Newsom moderation, but the problem is, John, Newsom is anything but a moderate. So as he can podcast till he's blue in the face, but his record speaks for itself. And he's been such a prominent liberal governor, liberal mayor. I just struggle to see how he gets through a primary as this moderate. I don't know that the primary electorate, or quite frankly, a general electorate, is going to believe not only that Newsom's a moderate, but that he knows what he's doing. California is in utter disrepair. It's not like he's an aw shucks governor who knows how to run a great state.
John Thomas, Republican political strategist. You can follow him on X at The Thomas Guide. John, thanks so much for stopping by.
Good to be with you, John. Thanks.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, with the end of the show quickly approaching, if you want to continue listening to us after we sign off at 3, that's easy to do.
Like, let's say you want to re-listen to that interview with John Thomas. Well, all you got to do is go to KABC.com, click on podcasts.
Quite frankly.
Go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes.
Quite frankly.
You can do a Google on the YouTube or get that handy-dandy KABC app.
Quite frankly.
Just search KABC AM in the Apple App Store or the Android Store.
Quite frankly.
It's the easiest way to listen live to this radio station and download all the podcasts.
I cannot believe it, quite frankly.
Well, ever since the fire started, all the heat has been going from the mayor to the fire chief, who the mayor demoted after coming back from Africa and dealing with the fallout of the fires. One department head who has been totally incompetent throughout this entire situation has escaped the mayor's fury. I'm speaking, of course, of the woman in charge of the Department of Water and Power. And Randy, she's not only highly paid, she's costing us more money by the day.
Let's not forget, this was a Karen Bass appointee, a recent Karen Bass appointee, who, when she got the job, Janice Quinones, she got a raise from $375K to $750,000 a year. They doubled the salary for this person to come here. So she is the highest paid employee that I can think of, even more than Barbara Ferrer.
No, thank you.
And now, because she says she's getting a lot of criticism over her handling of the fact that there were no water in the fire hydrants, she says we need $700,000 so she can hire security guards.
That seems about right.
For more, here's NBC4.
The head of LA's DWP says she is worried for her own safety. Now, this morning, the utility will ask the Board of Water and Power Commissioners to approve a $700,000 contract that would provide her personal security.
So you're going to jack up my DWP rates so she can have a bodyguard.
That's totally ridiculous. My guess is she'll get a driver in a car, too.
NBC4's Brittany Hope is live in.
How about she takes a pay cut? Why are we paying her $750K?
It's not like she's doing amazing things that you can't find anyone else to do. There are plenty of people out there who could screw up an entire department.
NBC4's Brittany Hope is live in downtown LA with details about this contract. Brittany, good morning.
Hi, Lynette. Good morning. Good morning to everyone at home. You know, LA.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Hi, Lynette. Good morning. Good morning to everyone at home. You know, LA DW.
I try to not use the morning show stuff because that's what you get, but sometimes it's all you have. The evening news is not like that.
No, it's not.
DWP says it.
But they got to keep it light because at any minute they have to throw to Al Roker.
He's got souffles to make.
Hi, Lynette. Good morning. Good morning to everyone at home. You know, LADWP says that Quinones has been getting security from local law enforcement since the Palisades fire began, but that security has to end because of a lack of personnel. So the department is now...
So we're wasting LAPD resources protecting this incompetent buffoon.
So the number is a lot more than $700,000. That's just the money she's asking for in addition to everything we've already spent.
So the department is now arguing the security still needs to happen, and that's why it wants to contract out private security. In a letter from the board, LADWP wrote in part, since again, LADWP has received numerous threats to the CEO, chief engineer's personal safety.
What member of local government hasn't gotten a whole bunch of threats lately?
Who on the radio or on television hasn't received threats? You want to know where you receive a lot of threats? Try being a Republican on CNN. I would love to show them my email.
It's a good thing that your Twitter handle wasn't John Phillips.
Nope, that guy got most of it. And I think he had to get private security.
Some of which have required direct intervention by law enforcement personnel. Documents obtained.
So because of that, we have to now pretty much double her salary again so we can pay for some bodyguards? How important is this person?
Equity, Randy, equity.
Documents obtained by NBC4 this morning reveal this would give Quinones security services for 1 year through Pinkerton Consulting and Investigations Executive Protection Services. The price tag is just over $703,000. LADWP did get...
What the hell is going on in the background there?
It sounds like a trash truck.
Is just over $703,000. LADWP did get proposals from 2 other companies to compare prices. Their contracts came up to over $930,000 and over $1.3 million. So
what, we're getting our own secret service for the head of the DWP because she's bad at her job?
How about this? Why not tell her what the LAPD tells the rest of us when we're the victim of a crime? Why not get some lights and get some cameras?
So they chose the least expensive.
They chose the least expensive that's still completely outrageous.
And more than her salary.
We have reported on the public criticism of LADWP and Quinones in the wake of the Palisades fire. Many who lost their homes questioning why fire hydrants had low water pressure and why a nearby reservoir was empty.
And instead of fixing that, we're going to hire bodyguards for her.
Oh, yeah, because the poor woman's being blamed.
I did reach out to LAPD asking for more details on those specific threats. Also reached out to LADWP seeing if they'll speak to us before that meeting happens at 10 a.m. where that vote is going to happen. We're still working to hear back from them at this point. Reporting live in downtown, Brittany Hope for Today in LA.
What's another $700,000?
Sure. We're spending money like it's growing from trees. Trees, by the way, that are overgrown and starting fires. You're so bad at your job that everyone hates you. And when everyone hates you and they start sending you nasty emails, that's when you say, okay, I'm going to spend $700,000 more on security so that they'll hate me more.
This is what they're focusing on. Not, I don't know, filling up the reservoir that was empty when the fire started.
No, you can see what their priorities are. Taking care of their buddies. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Jeffrey writes in. It's Jeff from Huntington Beach. Hey, John and Randy, love the show. First time writing in. Honestly, I don't know who would be worse, Katie Porter or Kamala. Katie was a horrible congresswoman for Orange County, so I can only imagine what she would do to the state. John, what are your opinions on Kamala or Katie Porter being candidates for governor? Are there any benefits that one candidate brings over another?
Well, Katie brings pure, unadulterated rage, which will make everything that she does and says hilarious.
Please.
But that's a dangerous road to go down because you really do need that person to fix problems. Kamala would be more of the same. It would be word salads that would be celebrated by the press. The rest of us will have no clue what she's trying to say. She hasn't thought about any of our problems, so she has no solutions. So she would be similar to 4 more years of Gavin. Katie Porter would be more of an activist governor, and I think that her ideology would probably have a big influence on her decisions. So I would say that she would be more left-wing than Kamala. Kamala is a professional, savvy politician, and she'll just do and say whatever Democrats are doing and saying. Katie Porter does not have a good relationship with the Democratic Party. Don't forget, when she ran for U.S. Senate against Adam Schiff, the party didn't want her to do that. I think Elizabeth Warren was the only one who endorsed her. Everyone else got behind Schiff. A couple got behind Barbara Lee. But her running for governor at a time when essentially most Democrats are looking at it and saying, okay, if Kamala wants it, it's hers. If she doesn't want it, then it's a free-for-all. And Katie Porter is kind of cutting the line saying, well, I'm in, but then she adds the caveat, well, if Kamala gets in, I'm out. Or at least that's where my head is right now. A lot of Democrats within the party don't look at her as being a team player. They look at her as someone who's willing to throw some Charles Barkley elbows to push her way to the front and then do her own thing. Well, that's typically, particularly in a one-party state, not how you get ahead. You get ahead by being the anointed one from the party, and the party says, okay, it's your turn, now you go. Or it's not your turn, wait a couple of times or two, and maybe it'll be your turn then. Katie Porter is not someone who plays by those rules. So I guess it just depends if you want someone who's going to be an antagonist to the Democratic Party, but more left-wing, or someone who's just going to be a doctrinaire Democrat who's just going to do whatever the party tells her, and that would be Kamala.
But which of those two is going to say Paul really loud?
Well, I think we know the answer to that.